The discussion that we are going to have this evening is for many of us, it's going to be kind of a refresher, at least in part. That's what I'm going to have to begin with. But then there are some points of emphasis that I want to make as we truly do make a good effort at making sense of the extremes that we are experiencing and that we likely are going to continue to experience with the developments in the atmosphere that have pretty well been dialed in now because of the way things have gone. So with that, I do want to emphasize that in Nebraska, we have our own array. We don't have to go to the coasts to find hurricanes. We don't have to go to California to find wildfires. We can do that very well here in Nebraska. That's the way things have developed. So just from a little bit of time, 3 years ago, you have the bomb cyclone flooding that meant water as far as the eye could see. As I was leaving, as Eleanor and I were leaving to do a family visit 3 years ago, that's what it looked like above the Missouri Valley at that time. And then in October, we had the wildfire in the Halsey National Forest that took out the Epley Conference Center at the Halsey 4-H camp. That was a real heartbreaker for many of us involved in 4-H or in Farmers Union, with so many years worth of reunions and camps and projects and workshops. And then this year, just like in 2012, but even worse to a certain extent, the Platte River was completely dry from Grand Island to around Columbus. In what was it, September? We went to Omaha. Eleanor and I moved from Omaha to Lincoln a little over a year ago. So we had a visit we needed to make in Omaha. So we drove to Omaha and we drove across the Platte River there by Mahoney State Park. Many of you are familiar with that, if not everybody. That was entirely Loup River water. It wasn't Platte River water. It wasn't water from Wyoming. It was water. It was water from the Loop that we were going across. That's how dry the Platte was. Thanks, by the way, if you are from the Columbus area and happen to know a young lady named Libby Finicaro, thank you to Libby for that picture that's part of this particular opening slide. Well, this is how the year 2022 has gone. It has been a warm year, and in fact, in Europe, it was record warm, also in parts of Central Asia, but the year 2022 is going to go down as a top 10 year for being warm, and this continues the trend that we have seen. In fact, you have to go clear back to 1976, 46 years, before you get to a year when the world temperatures were below normal. That's how long it's been, 46 years. It was the second warmest ever, January to October, in Asia, and the third warmest January to October in Europe. And now, as far as precipitation went in October for this particular year, much of North America actually was dry except for the Southwest. That's how dry October was. And it just kept getting worse and worse for so many. We know how the wheat crop is the lowest rated that it's been ever since ratings began back in the mid-1980s. Europe was mainly dry except for some very wet conditions in parts of Ukraine and Russia. And on the other hand, China had a very wet scenario in eastern and northern China. Southern China was very dry. And then in Australia, since I can walk over, I will point out here, Eastern Australia, record wet, and that has caused issues with their wheat harvest. They're getting a little bit better now, but there was certainly some problem there. And then in the top right, it just looks like a whole bunch of dark red and kind of almost burnt red a little bit. That's Nebraska in October, from the High Plains Regional Climate Center. all of Nebraska during October was less than 50% on precip. Many areas less than 25%, except for just a little bit in Arthur and Grant counties in the Sandhills. That was how dry things were in October, which is very, very unusual. And we have had continual warming. This, looking at the globe now since 1990, you can see that there has been, except for a little bit of the Eastern Pacific, there has been a trend of average temperatures of 1 degree Fahrenheit warmer than the long-term average back in the 20th century per decade, to the point that in Finland, which of course you can, if you go from the Arabian Peninsula and then go straight up, you'll run into Finland. In Finland, the annual temperature is more than 4 degrees Fahrenheit above its long-term average. And the biggest season change in Finland, you think of Finland, you think of skiing, you think of, it's pretty close to Lapland, pretty close to the reindeer country and everything. Early winter in Finland is now 9 degrees Fahrenheit above the value for temperature that it had in the mid-19th century. So there's been basically warming all over the world during the past 30 years, particularly in the higher latitudes. And at the same time, a slide that I wanted to make sure that I brought out to you, because this comes up from time to time. Whenever warming is talked, there is going to sometimes be a comment made of, well, the sun is stronger, so we're getting this increased solar energy. It's a solar energy that's jumping on us. Yeah, that's the reason for it. Well, that's bunk. Back about 1960, solar intensity and temperature values were roughly about the same. But in the past 40 years, definitely, temperatures have been sharply higher. That's just about almost a 45-degree angle going up, which is very steep. At the same time, solar intensity has been lower in the past 40 years. If you go back to the Nebraska climate study that Don Wilhite and Al Dutcher and several other scientists here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln put together back in 2014, with the help of some support from Farmers Union to simply get the legislature to fund that. If you go back to that study, you will see a chart like this. Don Wilhite put this together in that study. So that's where there's a big difference. If in fact if heating was simply or going to be what the sun gave us, we would actually be on a lower trend temperature-wise. We would actually be doing that, but that's not the case. And then we get to greenhouse gases. On the left, rising carbon dioxide measured at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. There's a gauge, a carbon dioxide gauge there that has steadily had increasing carbon dioxide content. On the right, rising methane from a global average of methane sensors. Taking a straight up approach, or again, that sharp 45-degree angle higher. So we're looking at parts per billion for methane, parts per million for carbon dioxide, but certainly adding just more and more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Since 1950, there has been a pronounced carbon dioxide spike. For thousands of years, you do ice core research, tree ring research. Geologists and climatologists have pretty well settled that for many, many, many years, the atmospheric carbon dioxide level was no more than about 300 parts per million. From 1950, there's been just about a straight up volume increase. The current level is now 420 parts per million, and again, pre-1950, just 300 parts per million. Little animation here from NASA shows how the greenhouse effect works. you get the solar energy, you get greenhouse gases then absorbing much of that heat from the sun, not allowing that heat to escape back into space. That's how the greenhouse gases work. They absorb the heat and then radiate around, continuing to warm the Earth. And as a result, we have shocking developments. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, some incredible hailstorms. This is from around Mason City, Nebraska, and Custer County just this past August. But there have been others we know certainly that have been terrible hailstorms. Hurricane Ian off the Florida coast in late September that just kind of sat and caused incredible damage in Florida, one of many hurricanes. We know that. There was also Hurricane Fiona earlier in September. In Iceland, glaciers are melting. This is a picture that I took when we made a trip there about 5 years ago. And that's a big circle from a melting glacier in Iceland. To the upper right, in Greenland, the ice caps are steadily melting away. That ice cap melting in Greenland likely has some relation to the wildfire here in Edison, or at least to the effects of wildfires. Of course, the Edison fire back in the spring that was so deadly. But wildfires in Edison and in Colorado and in California, you know where the ashes from those fires go? They go up to Greenland. And they settle on the ice cap, which adds to the heat absorption in the ice cap and increases the ice cap melting. So yes, there's a relation between, if you look at if you look at the ice cap in Greenland and say Greenland is thousands of miles away from Nebraska, from the middle part of the U.S., I can disregard that. It doesn't mean anything to me. Yes, it does, because what gets put into the air from fires like we have been experiencing doesn't just go away. It has a real stopping point. That stopping point is the ice cap, and then that adds to the melting potential there. And then finally, and in our checkbook, as producers, we get this. In Lancaster County, this is an example of tipback in this year's corn crop because of how drought developed in midsummer and then intensified all the way through the fall. What were our yields here? Yields in Nebraska were right around. Yes, Nebraska corn production down about 16% from last year. That's a big difference. And it wasn't just here in Nebraska that we experienced that. We had tipback going on in a number of locations, and Kansas had it worse than Nebraska in terms of that drought impact. Now, on the other side, we get supercharged storms. An incredible image here from Cherry County, because with the warmer atmosphere, more water vapor can be absorbed, can be contained by the atmosphere, which means when storms hit, they're going to hit hard, and rainfall is not going to be just your garden variety shower like I used to kid around about when I was doing weather on Channel 6, because these are heavy rains. Heavy rain starts at about 1.5 inches, because at that volume, at that intensity, 1.5 inches or 1.5 inches per hour, the ground cannot absorb it. It's going to run off. You get flooding, and you get a lot of washing out. A chart here from the UN climate change study showing that in the central part of the country, those heavy rains are definitely more likely to occur than not. Intensity is up by 10%. Again, supercharged storms do not really add soil moisture. They just add problems. They add flooding. They add washing out. They have their own list of complications for us. When it all is added up, you get billion-dollar disasters. In 2022, and we're looking here at this big chart from NOAA, National Center of Environmental Information, shows the 2022 billion-dollar weather and climate disasters through September. There were 22 cataloged in the first 9 months of this year. And since 1980, there have been 332 billion-dollar disasters identified as either a drought, heat wave, flooding, hail, hurricane, severe weather, tornado, wildfire, or a winter storm cold wave. Winter storm cold wave, remember the one that just caused all sorts of incredible damage in Texas here in 2021, do we not? Anyway, since 1980 in the U.S., there have been $332 billion disasters, total cost $2.275 trillion. The 2022 cost is $115 billion. In Nebraska, this text indicates that between 1980 and 2022, in the last 42 years, we have had a total of $54 billion events, 11 drought, 35 severe storm, 5 flooding, 1 wildfire, and then 2 freeze billion-dollar disaster events. But this timeline shows how everything has really, really ramped up since about 2008. And this is one of the main messages that I want to leave with you. It's a message of appreciation, I guess. What I would like to make sure that we have, because there were events, yes, from 1980 through about 2006, from time to time, certainly. But in the last 12 years, and then certainly in the last 6, these events have definitely increased. So if someone asks you, doesn't it seem like the weather is worse now than it used to be, or it's windier or whatever, you can confidently say yes. Because in the last 5 or 6 years, these events have just had a real sharp increase in their occurrence and in their development. And we have seen similar in Nebraska. This is the severe weather, or the billion-dollar disaster breakdown for Nebraska. And in Nebraska, since the 2006, 2008 time, things have increased. We had a little bit of a lull here in about 2016 or so. But in Nebraska, we've had 54 of these events, and we have seen an increase as well. And in fact, in 2012, 2019, and now in 2022, $5 billion in damage. So yes, things are definitely ramping up. One feature that has not gotten a whole lot of attention, perhaps, is how the storms that we've had this year have affected the center pivot prospect, or the center pivot situation. Because just from the storms this year, we may have had as much as $160 million in loss, with possibly up to 2,000 pivots getting destroyed or severely damaged, replacement costs of around $80,000, and $160 million. So yes, these storms are not just events that we that we can, kind of catalog today, maybe make a note in a diary or make a note on our phone calendar and then go on. These are lasting events, and the thing is, they keep piling on to where you solve or try to mitigate the damages from one event, and here's another one right after it. Now, as we look ahead into this next year, I'm not necessarily doing a forecast, but one of the big questions is for Nebraska this next year, what does our drought that we are in, looking at percentage of normal precip this fall, well below normal, the dry plat, little bit of a flow starting, but after the tip back and then with fires, there's plenty of moisture concern for this next year. We are going to be very dependent on springtime rainfall in order to get this moisture kind of back into working order, so to speak, with the kind of prospect that we're looking at for this coming winter. And winter is not a good time to replace soil moisture, as we all know. We'll get a little bit of snow here and there, but unless it's completely outrageous, you're not looking at really adding any moisture to the soil. And another long-term issue for the agricultural industry as a whole that I am concerned about, and I'm sure you are as well, is how are we going to fix things on the Mississippi? Or basically, how's the Mississippi going to fix itself? Because the drought that we had was not just here in the Western Corn Belt, but in the Eastern Belt during the month of October in Indiana and Illinois and southwestern Ohio. The drought monitor showed a change, a drought category change of 3 categories in a month. The Ohio Valley had a true drought issue in that September-October timeframe, and that helped to take away water from that lower Mississippi. Here in Vicksburg, you've got a lot of sandy areas and a very low water supply. Here in Tennessee, that edge on the right, well, that should be river, but it's not. It's a beach, and so the barge loads have been curtailed, and you've had to have lighter loads and everything. The Ohio River is responsible for over 70% of the water volume in the Mississippi, in the lower Mississippi. And with the drought that the Ohio Valley had, this is what came up. This is what resulted. And again, it's going to take time, but it's also going to take above average moisture in order to fix this. And again, this is part of the long-term back and forth extreme scenario that our climate change situation has given us. Another big checkbook issue that I think is important is in the past 5 years, crop insurance payout totals from damages, be they drought, be they the bomb cyclone and flooding, be they incredible winds like here from Iowa during the derecho in August of 2020. In the past 5 years, total crop insurance payout has been over $47.5 billion. Why is this something that I wanted to make sure I brought out? Because sometimes without a crop insurance payment, there may be a problem in keeping the checkbook going. There may be a problem in keeping the operation going. I don't know what everybody's situation is specifically, but I do know that when I was active going to farm meetings like the Farm Progress Show, like Husker Harvest Days, like the Farm Machinery Show in Louisville. When I would visit with producers, if we got to the economic side of things at all, and I tried to keep it general, but crop insurance came up there a lot. I mean, it came up quickly. And not just, and it wasn't a thing of, well, how much crop insurance you have. I didn't ask that, but it was certainly apparent that this part of the financial world was important. That's the reason I state that. And the reason I state this is because as we go forward, I think that it's going to be very important to keep telling the story of the importance of crop insurance to Congress, and make sure that support is still there. Now, there are a few things that I do want to leave you with in terms of ideas for managing or mitigation, because there's been some pretty heavy-duty statistics that I've given you this evening. First of all, soil health. It's maybe a no-brainer, but it is very important. Keeping that soil available as a sponge with year-round roots leads to notably less runoff and flooding because of better absorption. Also, there's more water available when it turns dry. And I think that is a very key issue to think about. And also continuing to support alternative energy. Again, this is a no-brainer. In some respects, but I think it's worth mentioning, wind power, solar power, because the multiplicity of energy, and in particular energy that does not use fossil fuels, is very important. A few action items or a few action points: crop insurance importance, water quality and safety. We have got a lot of it. We need to make sure it's good. I was very glad to see that you had a water quality program session during your convention here. And then one final item from me is scientist support. Get to know your state climatologist. I know that you've had Martha Durr on your program before, but I don't know what that means. Does it mean continuing to support the various climate smart initiatives from the current administration? I think that's certainly a part of it. But scientists need to know that they have our backing, and that we believe in what they're doing. And if you have a chance to subscribe to newsletters from climate scientists like Catherine Hayhoe in Texas, please do so. And pop them an email if you get a chance, if you feel like it, because they need to know that you are behind their efforts. With that, Mother Nature gives us a pretty nice Christmas card about this time of year. And I do wish you the best in the holidays, and obviously the best as you finish out your convention and then go forward into the next farming year. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Would you be willing to take a few questions?
Yes.
Are there some questions for Bryce?
Yes, sir. Yeah, asking about the Pacific. We are coming out, starting to, of a multi-year La Nina, where the water levels were cool off the South American coast. And when is when is that whole pattern going to go neutral and then possibly to an El Nino? I think we're going to be at a neutral phase in the Pacific by springtime. I would say into March and April. There is some potential that there could be a move to El Nino then during the summer of 2023. And I think that's a pretty good call. One caution that I have is that La Ninas sometimes can be pretty stubborn to change. And I'm pretty a little cautious about that, but I do think that that neutral by spring, and then possible weak El Nino by summer would be pretty good. And if that happens, then El Nino potential may bring us a little bit more of late summer precipitation chances instead of what we had to put up with this last year.
Let's give Bryce another round of applause.